All right, in the last video, I showed you how to take three capacitors and put them on a ground lead like this, or a ground lug. All right, here's the ground lug. Now, I left the wires full length on the capacitors, and then I put them on the ground lug. So there's a little bit of flexibility on the bottom of the capacitor to align them. So what you're seeing down in there now is the ground lug is attached to a bolt that's used to hold one of the other capacitors. There's metal capacitors in this radio. They're cans. And I got the ground lug. I undid one of the nuts. I put the ground lug underneath it and tightened the nut down. So those three capacitors, those three yellow capacitors there, are soldered together on the ground lug, and they're grounded, just like if they were in a can. Now the three wires themselves, I left them full length. I come up, I have what would you call spaghetti tubing on them. That's what the last video was, showing you how to make homemade spaghetti video. So you can see that the capacitor in the foreground, the lead comes up, it bends over and goes down the side, and it attaches to one of the wires that used to go to the terminal on the capacitor. And it's soldered there, and it's got a piece of white shrink tubing on it. Now, you look at that and it's simple. Well, it took me a while to come up with this in order to fit it in there. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you can see the rod. The rod to the left, that's a flexible rod, and I believe that might be the BFO. I don't know. Anyway, let me look. It's a flexible shaft. Yeah, beat no tone. It's the BFO. So that flexible shaft goes up into a box with the BFO oscillator or BFO tuning capacitor. So I needed that room. You know, I didn't want the capacitors touching that. And I do have vertical room. And that's how I decided to put the replacement cap. Now those three capacitors are 0.5 microfarads each. They're a big hefty capacitor. I showed you those in the previous video. But just want to show you, this took quite a while to come up with how to put that capacitor in there. Now, the metal can capacitor is still in there. The wires have been cut from the terminals. They're just in there, so if anybody opens the top of the radio up, they will look into it, and the radio will look original. That's the only reason. Now, the amount of time I put into coming up with how to do it, first I had to get the capacitors in my hands. And that, I explained that the last time, the amount of shipping. The shipping has gotten crazy in this country. Everything I buy on eBay takes over a week to get it. So, in other words, I really can't design how I can put the capacitors in that space until I actually have the capacitors. I also had to buy some grounding lugs. And then I decided to leave the leads as long as I could. And to give you most options, you have to leave options when you're dealing with a space. To do it nicely. Now I could have took the cans out, opened them up, and restuffed them. But that takes, I won't say days, but it's a mess, and it's a messy operation. This is the next step. So a person that wants to turn this radio totally original would only have to undo a nut, take the lug off, cut the leads next to the capacitor, and then put them back on the new can if they restuffed one. That's how I'm leaving this radio. This radio, I just do this in order to stay busy. And I just didn't want to just throw those capacitors in there willy-nilly. Now on the last radio, I had similar capacitor cans. I took the cans out, and I put the capacitors in that area. But I wanted to do it a little bit better on this radio. The professionalism in me, whenever I do something, I always want to keep it good enough that if another tech comes along, he's not going to shake his head at it. It's very embarrassing when you have to work with a guy that might be as smart as you or smarter than you, and you realize you cut corners, and he says something to you. There is professional jealousy in the field until you really get to know the other person. And then you don't do that anymore. If you really like the other person, and he's a good tech, you realize that at some point you do cut corners a little bit, or you work with what you have. And that's what a lot of people don't. They just go gung ho. And I did a video on making your own spaghetti tubing out of wire. And that's so when you put a capacitor into a space, you won't short out as a beginner. Or as you're working on the radio, you tend to move stuff to right or left to get the next cap in there. And if you don't put spaghetti tubing on the leads, one of the things you move off to the side may now be touching, and you don't notice it. You turn it on, you get smoke. But I just want to show you that's how I end up putting the capacitors in the radio. I just explained it to you. 3 of the leads, each lead of the capacitors on the ground lug. Ground lug's under a nut. Each wire bends up a little bit and then down on the side, down to the wire that goes to the can that's down on the bottom. And that wire gets tied to the capacitor. And before you solder it, you put your shrink tubing on there. And you bring it up. And it's a white piece of shrink tubing on this, in this case. I just wanted to show you that. This is for someone that's going to get one of these radios in the future. And I'm showing you how I did it, or how I'm doing it. And this radio will take a while because if I rush this radio, then what do I work on? You know, I go for long walks. The left knee's going bad, so that's my walks aren't as long. I have 2 hernias. I'm a walking dying old man. That's what I basically am. And I think I'm losing some abilities mentally, and I get frustrated very easily, and I'm misspeaking more than I used to. And it's age. It could be Alzheimer's. I don't know yet. But in other words, you know, it's like, well, you should get that checked out. There's nothing you can do. Now, my father, I remember before he died from heart disease, he was doing some really weird things. And I looking back on it, it was Alzheimer's. All right, he was doing some really wacky stuff. But anyway, yeah, I'm 72, and I'm staying busy. I like this radio as a form factor. I mean, it's really nice. It's really nice. It would be even better if it had the AM broadcast band on it, but it don't. And there's no, there probably, I do see a couple places I could put a power supply inside of it. I might do that, you know, just to stay busy. I think that's it. All right, that's it.